Cool. I will now admit everybody in three, two.
Hey guys, um, just while we're joining, we're probably going to start at 3 minutes past, 4 minutes past, just give obviously put time to trickle in. If possible, do you want to introduce yourself in the chat while we get going? That's okay.
There we go. Everyone's joining now. We've got a big group today.
Feels like we need some music while we're
Some
waiting.
music. Does anyone play good elevator music?
Well, Charles is the former DJ, right?
Oh, there we
Or
go.
maybe bedroom DJ
Yes. Well, no, yeah, bedroom DJ at the moment.
at the moment. At the moment, former rave DJ.
I went to this thing called I played paddle at the weekend, may as well, and they had which is an easier form of tennis. It's a bit like ping. Well, I mean, it's like ping pong, but on a tennis court. It obviously, it's got the sides.
Is it not like middle-aged tennis?
You can put it that way. But they had a rave button, so you hit the rave button. Not rave music plays, but the lights all get ravey, and yeah, it's a whole different vibe. Obviously for the kids. I was never. But yeah,
I
paddle is
think you've opened yourself up to criticism, explaining the fact that you play paddle, from all I can see on social media at the moment.
yeah. Well, it's better than pickle, I
Oh,
think.
is that, oh, that yeah? That isn't that the same
That's
thing
true.
in
That'll be next year, Charles.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Am I getting old? That way.
I hope we're recording this.
Yes.
We are.
Oh, I nearly said something then.
Cool.
Yeah.
We
I
can
think
start
we've got 25 people in, Charles.
Okay.
We can just
Let's
get going,
go.
I think. There's a few more coming along. Yeah, the interest this time was fantastic. So we've had over 50 people sign up. So yeah, I'm 25 here now. So that's
Sounds good. We'll stop talking about pickle or paddle. All right. Thanks for joining. If you just joined, can you introduce yourself in the chat, please, just so we can see who's who? Would be fantastic. So thanks for joining this GTM drop-in working session on how to get a meeting with the C-suite. I'm Charles. I'm one of the co-founders of Closing Foundry. Before we get into it, I'll quickly obviously introduce kind of who's on the call so you can understand, and then I'll quickly introduce Closing Foundry, and then we'll get into it. We've got 45 minutes. If we need to, we can go over. Generally, these sessions run slightly over. But yeah, it is a working session, so cameras on if possible, please. If not, if it's not possible, that's fine. Um, Please raise your hand, dive into the chat, speak up, whatever you need to do to interrupt. More than happy for anybody to interrupt as we go through, because as I say, it is a working session. You'll see we are recording, but we're only here to capture insight. So there's no sharing of names, company names, anything, confidential in social or wherever else. And please don't share any information outside the group. So broadly Chatham House rules. And that's important because if we do get into some detail about, somebody wanting to get into Capital One, right? So there's reasons they want to get into Capital One. We don't want to, kind of expose that outside of the group. Okay. The goal of this session, pretty straightforward, is to give you some practical advice, and that's the key thing, practical advice from our experience of what we've seen work landing C-suite meetings. Okay. There have been lots of questions, lots of pointed questions, lots of generic questions, lots of I'm not going to ask a question, but I just want to get past and register. We are not going to be able to get to all of the questions, but we will broadly cover a majority of them. Okay. So at the end of the session, if we've not answered your question specifically, or you want to go a bit deeper, we are happy to do a session, 15, 30 minutes, whatever it needs to be, to answer that specific question and help you with how to get access to whatever the account is, whatever the C-suite is, with a bit more context from you. We're going to be sharing what is a framework, obviously. with all these things on how you can get a meeting with the C-suite. If you wanted to complete that framework and for us to feed back to hone that framework or hone that positioning to get a meeting with whoever you want to get a meeting with, we can also go through that. James, do you mind just dropping that calendar thing into the chat? And then I'll introduce the guys. So on the call we've got Douglas. So Douglas is a GTM turnaround expert. His middle name is C-Suite. So what he doesn't know isn't worth knowing. He started in value engineering and has led teams at Oracle and Okta doing the mega deals, but has also grown both startups and scale-ups. So really well placed for this, like incredibly well placed. Laurie, we've got on the call as well, has led startups where there's literally zero revenue and taken them through to the scale-up phase. I think at peak it was about 50 million ARR, so worked through all those stages, but also worked in the big guys like Oracle and Siebel. Again, incredibly well positioned to go to talk today. And then we've got Gavin, who's our special guest, is the CEO and founder of Accelerate 360, who are outsourcing and lead generation agency that does exactly what we're talking about to about 40 or so clients. So there should be enough collective wisdom in the room to give you what you need. And the idea is we give you what you need based on what your questions are on your unique circumstances. So yeah, that is that's the setup. So we're going to cover these four things. We might not get to the, so I think someone keeps, we might not get to topic 3 and 4, but we should do. So we're going to go through what does the C-suite want to hear about? Super important, probably the primary kind of good goal for the day is what do they want to hear about? Then how do you get that message in front of them to get the meeting? Now, most of the questions that we've had are in these kind of two topic areas, right? So questions like, have you got a framework or guidance on how to best frame a proposition so it feels absolutely essential for that C-suite individual to engage? How do you best involve the C-suite early on? Co-creating a business case or an ROI story to communicate product value and secure meetings. Brilliant question, right? How do you start a relationship with a C-suite better than traditional outreach methods? Yeah, we'll cover that. Struggling with cold email. Yeah, we'll cover that, right? So yeah, first two topics super important, but obviously, it's pointless getting a meeting unless you can run it properly without messing it up. And then if they're interested, what the hell happens next? So we'll go through those areas as well. Okay. Okay, a little bit about us. So Closing Foundry, we help startups and scale-ups with GTM and B2B sales execution. We typically get involved in 3 states. So where revenue is kind of flatlining or it's declining or it's just not growing at the expected rate. And the root cause of that is where the GTM strategy isn't fit for purpose or B2B sales execution isn't where it needs to be. Okay. So how we fix that is with a design phase where we show you in 5 days what to fix and how to execute it in 90. There's an enable phase where we turn that plan into behavior. And then the run phase where we operate the system with you at the leadership level, the mid level, or even obviously at a seller level until that new rhythm starts to stick and until you start to close the gap between target forecast and actual. And this is obviously why we partner with E360. That run phase is where we execute or can execute the prospecting side of things. Okay. So with that, let's just set this up. So super important, I suppose, for a quick sanity check on whether this is something that you want to embark on. The Everest image here is not incorrect. Okay. So the promise of summiting, which is either closing an enterprise deal or getting a call with the C-suite or landing a deal, sorry, with a mid-market or even a large account. The promise of that is really quite significant. So it can be quite transformational. And when it happens, it's a real trajectory change if you've not dealt with a large organization It's potentially a solid cash injection and reliable cash injection. It also gives you credibility, referenceability to get more deals of the same size or smaller sizes. What we know and what we're trying to get to, and the whole promise here is if power compresses deal cycles, right? So going high and getting exact level sponsorship and being championed down in the organization can save months of messing about in the middle, where there are politics, there's indecision, there are egos, right? Landing one enterprise deal can also be more efficient from a time perspective than landing 5 or 10 smaller deals, right, of the same value. It can potentially be more efficient to service and grow, okay? Can, yeah. It also prevents, if you're going at the C-suite level, mid-cycle and end of cycle stalls or ghosting, where you need to get that C-suite approval anyway to get the thing over the line, okay? I suppose the softer stuff, it can give you a view on product market fit, message market fit, and all that kind of stuff. I think a really important point here on the pros is if you're talking to the C-suite, they're a lot closer to the P&L. You're probably talking to the budget owner, which is obviously where you need to be. Okay, so loads of positives, right? But you need to be really quite prepared. Okay, so you won't get into the door, and what a lot of what we're going to talk about today is this. You're not going to get into the door without a razor sharp point of view that talks about their world, right? And the outcomes in their context. You also need a solution that's going to have company-wide impact, right? You don't want to have a conversation and then just be thrown down into the middle because your solution isn't something they care about. It doesn't ladder up to their goals. It's interesting, but it's at a departmental level or a low level. You don't want that. You need a solution that impacts their world. Okay. As you go through the process, you need to be able to beat status quo, right? Which is obviously the biggest competitor. I know this is not about, landing the meetings, but you need the ability to, through value-based selling, get them to change. Okay. And final point is something weird on the slide called yo-yo selling. You need the appetite to be able to go up, right, at a high level, be sponsored down, do work there, then go back up to report back, then go back down, then go back up. Okay, so you need the ability to do that, whether it's the time, the impetus, the plan, the sales process, or whatever. We call it yo-yo selling. So your choice is whether you want to do it or not. I think everybody on the call wants to do it. So let's work out how we can do that. So with that, I think over to Douglas, I suppose really to frame what they want to hear about. So the first topic.
Thanks, Charles. So, the goal here is to get a meeting with a C-level in one of your target accounts. But it's a little bit more than that, as Charles said. So we want to get the meeting, we want to have a great engaged meeting, and we want to have follow-up meetings with both the C-level and his team. And that's where we really get into the nitty-gritty of, how we're going to solve a pain or how we're going to help achieve a goal. So people basically, and there's loads of papers written by psychologists and sales professionals and marketing professionals. People are typically driven in B2B buying, either pain or gain, but mostly pain. And if you can identify a pain and give evidence that you can solve it and what the magnitude of that pain is, you're more likely to get a meeting, right? So that's the number one thing. There's immediate pain. And I come from a cybersecurity background. So an immediate pain is I just had a data breach. I need to go on record to say how we're going to mitigate future breaches. Great. That's a huge immediate pain. I have a solution that'll help you to eliminate data breaches in the future. You can go to your board and they can go to the street and say that. Future risk is some of my competitors have been breached. I haven't been breached yet, but I know I'm being targeted. This is a big risk that's looming. Great. I have a solution that can solve that for you. And then an example of goal achievement is I've had one customer we did this with, which worked really well. Their goal was they wanted to sell 1 million more cars in the UK. They're a large dealer network in the following year. So we went to them and said, we believe we can help you sell 1 million more cars. Now, it's much more nuanced than that, and we have a framework. But ultimately, what this is, you're building a point of view, and the point of view is what gets you the meeting. It anchors the meeting. You refine it during the meeting, and it's a little bit of a challenging, should be a challenging point of view. Like, how can a cybersecurity company help me sell 1 million more cars? Well, I'm glad you asked that. Let me come in and talk to you. 30 minutes, right? Um, so it anchors it in the meeting. It helps you have an effective meeting and then say, let me prove this to you. Put me in touch with these 3 people in your organization, and you're going top down, right? But we're going to get into point of view in a minute. And I'll hand over to Laurie now, and he's going to go through the 3 whys, and this is why people buy.
Thanks, Douglas. Yeah. And I could talk to this slide for hours, so I'm honestly going to try not to, but this is the piece that I think every seller needs to have in their mind, because this is why forecasts don't get met, deals don't close. So for a deal to happen, the prospect needs to understand why I'm going to change, why I'm going to do it now, and why I'm going to do it with us. Now, all of that is probably going to stem from the point of view, the hypothesis that we're testing that Douglas just talked about. So it's going to flow all the way through. But these 3 areas are the key ones that need to be covered. And this is why I think getting to the C-suite becomes important, and why I think enterprise selling is so difficult. So let's look at a definition of sales. Sales is getting someone to do something that they wouldn't ordinarily do, preferably in the timescales that we want them to do it. Now, the only way those are going to happen is if that prospect can actually articulate why I'm going to change, why I'm going to do it now, and why I'm going to do it with you. Then you come into sort of the type of salespeople that we're looking at, who can frame all of this into the ongoing conversation and build it into a sales cycle. They understand why they're going to change. They understand the timescales for doing so, because we've built a compelling proposition. Now, one thing I see very, very often, certainly amongst enterprise sellers, is they're immediately going into pitch. Now, you read any psychology book, Freud 101, the way you're going to get someone to change their mind about something, particularly if they haven't even thought of it, is not by telling them. It's about generating the conversation. So actually the answers come from that. And there are a number of tools that we can use to do that. We'll talk about how we access those people in a moment. And I think there are a number of tricks and maybe some analogies that we can use to look at that. But it is about that hyper personalization, the way we want our sellers to behave, the way we want our sellers to act. And more importantly, that's on an ongoing basis. So, for example, one thing I like to see is salespeople taking responsibility. So they might break it up into a territory plan where they have their A, B, and C accounts. Their A accounts are those ones that we've researched, that we think could represent an opportunity, that we believe we can add value to. And as the salesperson, I'm going to own them, and I'm going to own that hypothesis testing, that putting together the point of view that will flow all the way through. And that's where I'm going to make a start. And then maybe the B's and C's, if we're lucky enough to have a BDR resource, then we can take a slightly lighter touch hyper-personalization approach, or a much, much lighter touch. But as a salesperson, I'm going to own that first rolling 10, and this is the way I'm going to work, and I'm going to instill it into my working day. But actually, the kind of people that we want doing this are the ones that are actually interested in things like psychology, politics, forming a strategy for putting all of those things together. So
it's a little bit like being a management consultant. Sorry to cut you off. So it's absolutely about don't be talking about products and services. Be talking about their world from a strategic perspective.
And I think we need to break that down even further. So I think the proposition, the hypothesis that you need to put forward, the point of view, it needs to appeal to them as a business, them as an individual. Now, it might be the wrong type of individual, for example, from a psychological perspective. It might be someone who's very averse to risk. I've tended to work most of my life in startups and scale-ups where we don't have the branding, we don't have the market acceptance. So actually what you're doing is you're building that sales cycle. People aren't coming to you saying, I need to go and buy a new ERP system, and so I'm going to do a beauty parade with Infor, SAP, and Oracle. We're building those sales scenarios. To do that, we want to get some top level buy-in, which we will continue to hopefully use. I like Charles' analogy of the yo-yo, and bring in that C-level, the budget holders, the people that can find budget or free up budget from elsewhere, but based on that point of view, which could be as simple as one technique I've often used, particularly for what I'd call those A accounts, is actually sending out a straw man ROI. So I built a basic ROI model. I've applied it to their organization in an area where we believe there's pain. And actually, the good thing about that is sometimes it kind of helps to get it wrong as well. One thing people like to do is tell you why you've got things wrong. So there are a number of techniques. We can go into the how, but it's having that mindset of always making sure that everyone we're touching on that yo-yo sales journey can answer the question of why change, why now, why us?
Yeah.
And to do that, we need that point of view.
From my perspective, Laurie, just to add to that, really, I think the hardest thing to achieve is the why now. You and I have talked about this previously. And so, that what you're talking about there, you're not going to promote a why now based upon a bunch of features and functions in a product.
No.
What you are going to do is promote a why now based upon a compliance need, a legal requirement, an ROI that prioritizes that project into the top 5 things on that person or that company's to-do list. Because if it's in 5 to 10, it's not going to happen. It's always going to kick around at number 6 for a while until you can promote it up. And all you're talking about there is saying, create that need by asking those open questions throughout that process. And if those open questions have to be answered lower in the business, that's not a bad thing, but do that promoted from the top, because and find a way and a mechanism to keep returning back and validating that process and getting that additional sponsorship from the C-level, as Charles said, to reduce that sales cycle.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, let's thank you for that. So let's move on to the next piece of the puzzle, so to speak. Unless Douglas, you've got anything to add to this component.
No, not really. The only thing I would say is, I do agree that why now is always it's easy to differentiate yourself from the competition, which is the why us, right? That's relatively easy. If you have a good product, you have a good team, good references, etc. The why change, a little more difficult. In fact, can be quite difficult. The why now can be incredibly difficult. And, if you have something like a compliance change or a new legal requirement, that's a compelling event. That makes it relatively easy. The other thing you can do is you can create a compelling event, either psychologically or physically. Psychologically, it's again increasing the pain, reminding at every turn that the cost of delay is X, Y, and Z, and the cost of delay, and Laurie mentioned risk-averse personalities. Risk-averse personalities are terrific because you just identify all the risks in the status quo and how you solve them. That's one way, and the sooner you get this implemented, the sooner you'll get to sleep at night. The other physical thing you can do, and I'm not a huge fan of discounts, but you can, if you feel like you've got the why change absolutely nailed off, the why us absolutely nailed off, the why do it now versus the end of your month, quarter, year could be, we're running a promotion. I can do you a much better deal. This really only works for very large deals, because if it's a small deal, the discount you're going to give is not that impactful. I'm not a fan of discounting, but it can be a creative, compelling event. That's my only point on the why now.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. And I suppose the other dynamic here is that this stuff doesn't change, right? This is buyer psychology. Okay, we're in 2026. We've got AI doesn't matter, right? This is how people need to rationalize, making a change in their own mind.
I think that that plays, Charles, to the difficulty of what you see with a lot of account execs and a lot of entrepreneurs is they're selling. And when you're in sell mode, you're thinking about your own sales process. And what you have to map to is the buy process.
Yeah.
And the buyer process is the piece that leads through that.
Yeah, and so this is absolutely defensible. All right, why change? Why now? Why us? Couldn't be more important. So
And it should be part of your sales process, quite frankly.
yeah,
Mm.
it is. Yeah, it is the process. Okay, cool. I think Douglas, this one's on you. Sorry, it's a bit slidey, guys, but we will. I can take them off the screen. But yeah,
Charles is just worried I'm going to go off piste if there's not a slide in front of me.
yeah,
No, look, I think everybody knows what a point of view is, right? It's a hypothesis. I have a hypothesis for your business. I have a hypothesis, A, you have a problem and I can solve it. Or I have a hypothesis that A, there's an opportunity in front of you, which is either for growth or cost reduction or risk reduction. Only three reasons people buy, right? They either have a big risk they're trying to eliminate, they have an efficiency problem they're trying to fix, or they have a growth either opportunity or a growth problem, quite frankly, if they're not growing. Um, that those are the three things a POV should be, right? And it really shouldn't mention your product, and it shouldn't necessarily mention your company, and it shouldn't have a huge number of slides, right? So the best point of views that I've ever seen are what I call a point of view on a page. So you can put it in a single page email, and preferably in the top portion, you can make it absolutely killer so that someone reading it on their phone, which is where most people are going to read emails nowadays, especially if they don't know who they're from, they just scroll through and get rid of the dross that comes through. And if you catch their attention in those first few lines, I know you want to sell a million more cars. I can help you sell a million more cars. Okay. So how do we create these point of views? So there's a little bit of a framework and there's a lot of thinking and a little bit of a sausage machine behind this when we do this at scale. But if you think of that goal or challenge, so I have a goal, I want to sell a million more cars. I might have a challenge. I need to reduce the cost of my showrooms by 15%. Okay. And then there's a linkage to the value proposition. So the linkage is, well, how are your customers buying today? Well, they're not buying online and they may never buy cars online. But if you can't track what they're doing online, um, then you can't follow up with them. So they're browsing your website. You don't know who they are. You don't know what they're doing. The value proposition is we can help you understand who your browsers are and turn them into customers, drive them to the showrooms, make the showrooms more efficient at the same time. So that's kind of a linkage between goals to the pain or the opportunity, and then the value proposition and how you can deliver that. And then it always, it can be controversial. The more controversial, the better, because somebody's like, you're not going to help me. You're a software solution. How are you going to help me sell more cars? Give me 30 minutes and I'll explain it to you. So that's kind of in a nutshell what a point of view is. And Lori touched on this before. I think it's really important to think about, especially as you scale your sales teams, and some of you may already have scaled sales teams. When you're looking at selling to the C level, it's a higher level sale, which means you need to understand your territory. And this is your prioritizing your accounts, A's, B's, and C's. And in your A's, at least, you need to have account plans. So that's where the real work is done. I need to understand this account. I need to understand what's keeping the CEO up at night, the COO, the CFO, whomever is most appropriate to your solution, or maybe multiple, right? What's my point of view of how I can solve this challenge for them? And what is my strategy to get to sell high and get in low? And, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, getting in low at the same time to get information. And then finally, the point of view, put the point of view on a page, and then you have a very tailored message that then you can use a little bit more of a mass market, for the lack of a better term, means of getting this message in front of C levels and getting meetings.
Yeah. So to the question about how do you differentiate yourself in a massive email, in a massive LinkedIn, it's all saturated. It's by doing the deep work, so to speak, and that can be automated with GPTs and AI and all that kind of stuff. But the logic you need to get is, what's the goal? And people will talk about their goals openly, company reports, they'll talk about link, whatever it is in the press. Then what's the challenge impeding goal achievement where your solution helps? And you need some interpretation of that. Obviously, to Douglas's point about how you shift cards by improving the ability to track where they go after they've left your site. But that's the craft bit. And again, that can be automated with GPTs if you've got the right kind of prompts and all that kind of stuff. But goal, challenge impeding goal achievement, linkage to your unique proposition. And I'll share this framework with you after, so you can apply this to your unique circumstance. So, Miles, you want to get into whichever the account is that you talked about that I won't mention, we can help you apply it into that. Any questions on this specific framework from anybody on the call? Presume it's clear, right? It's super clear. Yeah. All right. Fantastic. Okay. Let's move on to how do you get the message in front of them? Clearly, email, LinkedIn, phone, saturated, challenges around deliverability, all that kind of stuff. So I'll hand over to Gavin, this is a data set. Maybe Gavin can introduce it, but yeah, over to you, Gavin.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we do hear a lot of the phrases email is saturated, LinkedIn is saturated, nobody answers my phone calls. Um, I don't 100% believe that. I think, I still receive a lot of cold emails, and there are many of them that I will read. There are some of them that I might even respond to. But what they're doing is they're getting that attention, very much to what Douglas was talking about earlier, quite quickly into that process. Now, these stats are quite, if you look at the headlines, they're a bit frightening, but don't worry about them too much because they're not that bad. This is across all of our customer base, all of our client base. The reactions, and this is for our lead generation part of our service, and it does include, we have account execs doing high-end selling as well, so it does include their activity. But about 80% of these clients are software, so context there. The key message here for me is the 11.9. Once I actually make contact with somebody and they engage with me and say, "Oh, I'm interested," or, "Yeah, this is good, but call me back later," or whatever that looks like. After that, there's still an average of 12 touch points, 12 engagements with that person that are required before we get what we call an SQL, but that is a qualified meeting with that exec. And that exec has to be an influencer or a decision maker. That's how we're judging that SQL. So in reality, it may be more than that, it may be less than that. But whatever happens, all of those touch points have to be relevant. And this is just at the top of funnel stage. Now, if you then flip that on its head to get that first engagement across all of our lead database, and there's about 300,000 individual leads within our database currently active across all our campaigns, you need to make 44 activities to get that person to engage. So for one lead to engage, 43 others may not have engaged at all. So that's what that stat is across all activity. And the reason that's important is that number is quite key, because the goal you're trying to do is, by doing the personalization, the point of view, everything that we've talked about to this point, you are trying to reduce that number of 44. And part of the process about doing that is that tiering between A, B, and C. Because in A, I could spend 5 hours researching one of your companies, phone up and find out you bought my competitor yesterday. So there is a balance here between the level of research you're doing versus actually just getting your message into the market. And that's why that ABC tier for us, with all of our clients, is really critical. A is hyper personalized. It's a small number that you do more research on. You really do make that message almost one-to-one. B, you sub-verticalize. So you might look at not software and send a generic email message, but you might actually look at a really tight sector within that, whether that is supply chain management, whether it is warehouse management, whether it's, whatever it looks like. And then you have to apply multiple channels to actually engage that person. And the key here is cadence management in my book. It's about, LinkedIn, you may not, depending upon your target persona, they may be active on LinkedIn, they may not be. If they're not active on LinkedIn, then all you're trying to do for them and with them on LinkedIn is reinforce your personal brand with them by maybe commenting on a post that's been put forward by their company or something like that. So again, these channels are all important when they're working together and in a set pattern of delivery.
Gavin, question. So,
Yeah.
like, let's say most people on the call don't have a sales team. They're short of time. They know there are, let's say, 5 or 10 of these, accounts that they want to get into. That might be, I don't know, 20 C-suite, or let's just keep it simple. It's 10 C-suite. Um, how outside of standard channels, what else can be used and works based on what you're seeing now?
So for the top tier, it's very much worth thinking about direct mail as well. Okay, we're seeing quite good results out of direct mail, where that direct mail has a higher value type approach to it. Now, we might send out a tea bag but it's still got a very relevant message with a look, let's have a cup of tea. That still works at sea level because they're remembering the tea bag. Okay. But only if the message was relevant in the first place. Now,
Right.
that is an expensive form of doing it, but I think you and I were talking, Charles, on another occasion where there was some research in America that was done where they wrote a very, very boring letter and they sent it via snail mail and then they sent it via FedEx. And the response rate via FedEx was much, much greater than by snail mail because the perception of the effort that went into it and the value that you attribute to a FedEx package was very different to a normal one.
Yeah.
So again, there are some psychological wins you can do with that direct mail and clever initiatives but again, the cost of that means it's got to be done into a tier where you've got a clear point of view and you've got a clear sort of hyper personalized message to them.
Yeah,
But
but
the goal here, particularly, I'm assuming, Gavin, must be the reduction of that, not across the board, but the reduction, because that's actually, those are quite scary numbers. If you do the 44.1 times the 6.4 times the 11, that's quite big. So if we can do anything to reduce those, that puts us in good shape. Now, obviously, we're going to segment and target some accounts harder, but you would hope that some of those, the 44, the 6, and the 11, would by definition start reducing. Is that fair?
It is fair, and I think part of it, don't forget as well that the activities per engagement in this metric do include your volume activities in your tier C. So
Right.
your tier C response rate. So if you take an average response rate to emails these days, don't measure deliverability, don't on anything except reply rate. Okay, because click-throughs, open rates, that's spam checkers, it could be anything, right? But if you look at how many replies am I getting per 100, and then if you're achieving somewhere around 1.2%, that is a real gold standard these days. And of that, I would be looking to get 20% of those to be positive. That's in a cold email environment. Okay. So this does include some of that volume approach
Yeah.
that sits down there, which typically has a 0.5% response rate. Where you are, but nothing you said is wrong. What we're trying to do with multi-channel is to put that across all three tiers and get that 44 down. But what's really important as well is by getting that 44 down, you still want enough of the engagements to come through to keep that SQL number at around that 7, 8, 9, 10 a month or whatever your average is.
Yeah.
Reason being is the percentage in the bottom right hand corner. If you've got great point of view, if you've got great message, right place, right time, right person, then what's actually going to happen is you're going to get that meeting to sit because that's the next challenge. Getting it is one thing. Making it happen is the next one. And that does require touch points from you in between the booking and that meeting. That's our average set to sat rate. That excludes anything that is not rescheduled, that is rescheduled more than once. So we allow a single reschedule and sit into that percentage. But the only way to get, but if I see, and it's quite interesting when we measure this, if I see that SQL number go up to 10, that response rate starts going down a little bit. That SAT number starts going down a little bit. So again, it's getting the balance between those rights, making sure that what you're saying is relevant at all times.
Yeah. So if I'm doing this on my own and I've got a million other things to do, right? I've got 10 that I want to go after. I need to create a point of view for 10. And I want to go out and I've got the mobile number, I've got the email address, I've got their address. How long is that plan? Is that a 2 weeks thing to get going, or how long does that take to get going?
I mean, getting it going is relatively straightforward. If you're asking how long it takes to get results, I mean, we're normally talking for any pipeline, you're talking about a 2 to 4 month ramp, depending upon the level of the product, the
Yeah.
level of the target audience. But getting it going can be relatively straightforward. There are plenty of tools out there you can buy. Whatever you do, don't fall into the trap of getting too tech heavy on this at the very beginning. You know, an inbox won't, I mean, if we're running automated inboxes for people, we used to run 50 emails maximum per inbox per day. We're running 15 because we know now that deliverability is impacted if there are more than 15 emails going out of a single inbox. And those inbox are managed across 30,000 warm-up inboxes every single day. So they are constantly being warmed up and maintained, even if they're not at peak send at this point. If you want to get into all of that, that's an absolute minefield for any normal business. So that's why companies like mine exist, because we can get on and do that sort of thing, stay ahead of the curve on that. I
Yeah.
think if you're just focusing on your sort of top 20, rotating through those, chat GPTing to save yourself some time on getting some of that insight, then writing a hyper personalized email, you can do that within a day.
Yeah. Okay. It's just the heavy lifting of the brain to do the linkage, right?
Yeah, you've still got to go through the process of getting that linkage, that point of view, you know, your relevance to that and your personas, your go-to-market strategy. You still need to write that.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you've already got that and you know what you're saying. You just need to make sure you're saying the right thing to trigger the right people.
Yeah. Can you train a BDR to do a point of view?
You can, depending upon the level of the BDR. I would always suggest that you keep a BDR away too much from that because their whole goal is get a meeting, right? Their goal is not to sell the product, it's to get you in front of the customer for you to sell it. So in reality, if they're too deep involved in building the point of view as
Yeah.
opposed to refining it, then they can get too much into the weeds too early.
Makes sense. Okay, we've got 2 minutes to cover two topics. I'm not sure how we're going to do that, so let's go over a bit. Are there any questions about this from anybody that's on the call? Because it's important and contentious and opinion led in some ways.
No, not yet, Charles, but I'll flag if there's.
Sounds good. Okay, so let's say you've landed this C-level call. How do you manage it without messing it up, Douglas?
Yeah. So again, you go in with your point of view. You have a point of view. Most likely, your C-level target has already seen your point of view, whether it be in the LinkedIn message or brief telephone chat, etc. But you go in and you start testing this hypothesis. Um, and by testing the hypothesis, you're getting to what Lori talked about before, which is the feedback. I'd love to get your feedback on this. I think I can help you sell 1 million more cars a year, and here's how. Well, I don't know if that's really going to drive. Well, let me give you, so be prepared, right? So as part of building rapport, right, you're saying, well, I've done some research and some of your competitors, or in this case, some of the large car dealership networks in France, in Germany, in Ireland are using their web presence much more efficiently, and this is the kind of results they're getting. So have that data ready, because what you're doing is your pain is you need to sell 1 million more cars. What's the magnitude of that pain? And do your research and do your work, and don't just use Chat GPT to do it, because this is where Chat GPT and others really hallucinate. So you want to, and if you do, test the hypothesis, but build that rapport. keep your timing very clear in your head, because you don't want to get to the end of the meeting where the C-level says, "All right, well, that's been really interesting. I got to run." You're like, "Okay, well, I'll call you sometime." That's no good, right? So you always have to be looking at, okay, so I, as your management consultant now, not salesperson, if I'm going to help you sell 1 million more cars a year, um, you know, who from your organization, how would you see this working? You know, I believe I can solve this problem, or I can, provide impetus for this gain, but who do I need to speak to? And start that conversation early. And then again, you're building rapport because he's giving you or she's giving you information, you're giving her information, and then ultimately you book the next meeting both with the C-level, right? This is really important. So you say, okay, well, I'll go and talk to John, Sally, and Pete, as you suggested, and see how we can do this. But in the meantime, I want to come back in 30 days, 2 weeks, depending on the sales cycle and how long, and the C-level's availability, and give you a report on what I found, and I'll be able to fine tune my hypothesis.
So you're not going into demo. That's not the next step, right? Or
No, absolutely not. And most C-levels aren't really that interested in seeing demos, right? They're interested in understanding how you're going to solve their business problem, and most importantly, where possible, where you've done it before.
right. And so it's continued. So that on the screen, another slide, apologies, with blocks on it. But yeah, so this is what a buyer needs to go through. Problem identification, solution, blah blah. You can read what's on there. So it's just a continuation of problem identification and quantification. I would add on to that. So you just continue down that path to understand more about that problem state. Don't pitch anything. You continue discovery mode.
No, that's absolutely right. And the way C-levels think, and some of us have been C-levels before, right? It's not about it's almost as important getting somebody to validate the problem for me, and then whether I use his or her solution to solve it is another matter. But this is real value to me because now it helps me to think about a problem I have and how I'm going to fix it.
Okay, brilliant.
Sorry, I'm going to quickly jump in on that. One of the great things about going through that process and hopefully landing your first contract is A, you built up the experience, but B, you built up the reference. And you can use that reference to get to other C-levels. So just a silly quick example. I was working for a startup. We couldn't even spell ARR at the time. We had no customers, no prospects. We made our first few deals. I personally sold to Diageo, Tesco, and I can't remember, Diageo, Tesco, Unilever, and I wanted to get into Philip Morris. Actually, the way I did that was I put a lunch together with Diageo, Tesco, Unilever at a high level, at C-level, and asked if we could invite someone from Philip Morris. They actually came to that lunch. My point of view was built in that lunch. So there are lots of techniques that we can use, lots of techniques for getting there, and we can happy to talk more about some of those hows and the techniques, but also use your customers. They're a great way. You've already added value to them to start building out that hypothesis and actually grant you access to potentially other C-levels.
I mean, adding to that,
question. Ooh, sorry.
adding to that slightly, Laurie, that is about validation of that message as well, because
It
they
is,
are
yes.
friendly audience for validation. And that does lead into what I know Charles is going to mention, which is the question that has popped up in the chat. For me, which the question being, how do you leverage your personal contacts and should you? My personal reaction to that is yes. I think it is about validation of point of view. It is about testing messaging, and that can go all the way back to where you are in your development cycle with your product as well. That is an audience that will give you engagement in your product, but will also refer you to people who may be interested in what you've got, why you've got it, and what you're positioning in a different way. It's all about a network.
Yeah. Douglas, have you got a perspective on how and should you leverage your personal contacts to get C-suite meetings?
Yeah, no. So it's the old there's a hot introduction and a warm introduction and a cold introduction, right? So And by the way, hi, Alessandro. The person that asked this question, I haven't spoken to in about 25 years. We used to work together. So it's nice to see you about. Uh, so, warm introductions are where you're maybe a second, node connected to somebody on LinkedIn. You know somebody who knows somebody, and you say, "Hey, can you introduce me to this person?" But again, having a point of view, saying, "I really want to go see this C-level or this decision maker, and here's why." Because the person that you're asking to make the introduction, obviously, is putting their credibility on the line. So that's one technique you can use, and it absolutely accelerates the ability, A, to get a meeting, and B, build rapport. Oh, so you used to work with Alessandro. How did you know Alessandro? How long, blah, 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 blah. And, oh, yeah, I worked with him too about, in this particular space. That's interesting. Yeah. Immediately you've got rapport. Immediately you got some level of credibility. And then you go in with your point of view.
Yeah, brilliant. And that could, yeah, I don't think you can't underestimate that network on how that could be, used for growth. And I'm sure we've all done it in some way, shape, or form. Um,
And maintain. That's the important thing about maintaining your network as well. So, don't just use your network when you need to, it's been 25 years since I spoke to this person, but I'm going to hit him up for a warm introduction. The best people I know at networking, and I must admit I'm not one of them, is constantly connecting with their hundreds of people in their network.
yeah. So if I was to summarize, I suppose this whole session potentially, it's all about the point of view, and I'll give you a perspective here as well. So, if you think about the sales cycle, which is to get a signed contract at the end of it, and they need to make a decision based on whatever the business case looks like, the pain, the risk, the opportunity, you're actually that point of view carries through the whole of the sales cycle. So the start of it, it might take one shape and then it changes and adjusts and all that kind of stuff through that sales cycle until you reach a point of, yes, this organization can help me remove that, get that, right? So your point of view is absolutely, beginning with the end in mind. And in some way, shape, or form, or from a theoretical perspective, you can, get that point of view, and that could, in theory, carry through, and it could be the reason why they actually land you land the deal. So, spending as much time as possible doing that deep research is important because that point of view is how you can advance the deal, right? I would say anyway. Um, okay, let's pause there. Has anybody got any questions around any part of this or wants to dig into any of those their specific circumstances? Okay,
No, I think
cool.
we're okay.
Sounds good. Um, so if anybody wants to, I'm going to send out two things, right? So I'm going to send out the point of view builder. You might have seen a framework for how to execute a C-suite call. And I think there's another framework. So I'll send that stuff out. If you wanted to go through the point of view that you've crafted for whichever account or C-suite you want to get into, James, if you can put that meeting link in the chat, get in touch and we'll spend time crafting it with you. But if not, I hope you've enjoyed the session and got enough out of it. The idea is to give you, the juice to be able to do it. And with that, thanks for your time.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.